Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to the Irv Homer Show, broadcasting from IrvHomer.com. And it is Friday, October the 3rd, 2008. I know that the big debate last night between Sarah Palin and Joe Biden has been discussed ad infinitum across the board. Everybody, all the experts came out, everybody knows what and who what, but we're not going to deal with that. We're going to deal with a more important subject tonight. And as I said, we're broadcasting from IrvHomer.com. My name is Irv Homer. For those of you who have never heard of me before, that are online right now, and we're heard all around the world, our program, starting out as a more or less just something to do, has grown by leaps and bounds. And the numbers of viewers and the number of participants and the emails we receive from around the world are just mind-boggling. Never thought it would grow this big, from what we consider to be just a little homespun experiment. But we do thank you for all your emails. Thank you for your tuning in. And we've got a lot of things to tell you in the future. We have contacted a phone company. And instead of our chat room, where you can get your questions on board right now for Dr. Nurray Needleman, our special co-host this evening, we'll be able to take your phone calls in about 2 weeks. The phone line is already in, but we need special headsets that Ron has ordered. And my website, tell your friends about it, is www.irvhomer.com. If you care to email me, which many of you folks do, asking questions that I respond by email, is evilerv, one word, evilerv at irvhomer.com. And all of this is put together by my son Ron of RGH Computer Services. For all your computer needs, you simply call 215-322-8685. That's 215-322-8685. And you can be a guest on the program if you care to, or we can set this thing up in your own office. If you're a businessman, an automobile dealer, you can do your own show. And we have the facilities and the capabilities of setting this up in your own office for you to be your own television star. All that being said, just let me remind you once again, and I think it is vitally important as we reach the point of November the 4th, I believe it is, when the election will be held. People are still confused as to what the Electoral College is, but if you go to September 8th program on the archive, and you can get into the archive, you can get a copy of this, the Electoral College, how it works, and a lot of misconceptions about whether the popular vote is the way people get elected to office or whether they don't. So, September the 8th program, is that right, Ron? September the 8th? Yes, he said the affirmative. And yes. You can get a copy of the Electoral College, and you'll be the smart one in the community to be able to explain not only to yourself, but to your friends and neighbors. That being said, let me introduce Dr. Nurray Needleman, not only my own personal psychologist. It keeps me on the straight and narrow and out of prison most of the time. And,
what a job that is.
And a dear friend for many, many years. One of the few people that I hold in high esteem. You know me, folks, I don't recognize too many people as genius, or too many people that I rely on. Irv Homer has always managed to swim upstream by himself and pay the price for it, of course. But Dr. Needleman has been a great assistance and a great help to me over the years, and especially since I lost my wife. So, Dr. Needleman, it's a pleasure to have you here. Good to see you, baby.
It is good to see you, Irving. It's really a pleasure I feel like I'm in Bill and Ted's Excellent Adventure here, that we're doing this thing, and it really reaches all over the world and gives us a chance to hang out together for an hour and to do what we've been doing for years. Not just talking about psychology or issues about the workings of the mind, but relating it to life in general, or even politics and things of that nature.
Well, tell our vast audience, Dr. Needleman, a little bit about yourself, and then we'll take questions on the chat room. They're starting to fill up now, so if you have a question for Dr. Nurray Needleman, psychologist, please feel free to get on board on the chat room or send us an email, and we can take your email at evilerv@irvhomer.com. So tell us a little bit about who you are, what psychology is all about, and how the world right now, Dr. Needleman, is suffering from stress, and people are like verblungent, as they say in Chinese.
Psychofverblungent.
Psychofverblungent.
It's a new diagnosis.
It's a new diagnosis.
My name is Dr. Nurray Needleman. Call me Murray. I've been a psychologist for 45 years. I have a doctorate from the University of Pennsylvania. And in some ways, I'm in private practice, in partnership with my wife Ann, and I'll be giving out that number from time to time. And I work with all kinds of things: individuals, couples, stress, post-traumatic stress syndrome. A lot of my clients have returned from the war. I work with people who have been in all the wars. I work with human sexuality. I teach people how to meditate. I help people with their anger. I teach mainly people how to grow, which is the thing I'm most interested in. And as I said, I've been doing it for about 45 years, and 44 years actually. It's 1 year less than I'm married. That's how I know. And I really enjoy what I do. And as you know, I was on the radio and WWDB for about 19 or 20 years. I had my own show. We had a nice audience every week. We talked about all manner of things. Nothing is off the board. And mainly my whole thing is teaching people how to grow, because the fact of the matter is you're already perfect the way you are, except you don't know it, because you look at yourself through your five senses and you judge what you see rather than who you really are. And what I like to do with people is to show them that they're beyond their own sense of the inner imposter. They're beyond who they think they are. And that's really a direction that the world's moving in anyway. That the world wants to move in a direction where we feel a sense of connection, a sense of contact. I was saying to Irv earlier that in spite of what you see, here's a perfect example of what I'm talking about. If you think the world's going to hell in a handbasket, it really isn't. I have a concept that I work with people. Let me just throw this out to you. It's called the edge. Whenever people come to the edge, that's when they get sick, that's when their voice trails off, that's when they look away. But whether you like it or not, we're all, because of evolution, and yes, Sarah Palin, there is a thing called evolution, and it didn't happen, and man did not walk with the dinosaurs. So the point is that we're all taken to this edge, and we're going to go over this said edge either voluntarily or involuntarily. And the purpose of the edge is it's our next our personal level of evolution. It's something we have to move over. The great psychologist, Carl Jung, who had been a student, been an associate of Freud, said many years ago that which we don't make conscious comes to us in our destiny. And whether you like it or not, it does. And so we're all in this chronic state of the not there yet, and we're moving towards our own higher level of self-acceptance. And what's going on in the world today is we see the bad economy and we judge it and we say, oh, everything is coming to an end, when it isn't. It's just beginning. My point of view is that the world is ready for what I call, not a religious, but a spiritual transformation, where people get beyond the illusion of the human mind and realize that we're all deeply connected. Our sense of, as opposed to operating from the way we're now operating, from fear and power and greed, which you see the effects of, it alienates us, it cuts us off from each other, it cuts us off from our beloved, it cuts us off from our higher self, it cuts us off from other countries. And for the last 8 years, we've been under the rubric of an untreated drug addict as president. As Paul Begala referred to him the other week on CNN, a functional moron. And what's really going on is that we're moving beyond that stuff to a deeper sense of connection, and we need to have leadership that really reflects itself on a deep level. Even the little bit of cooperation that you saw between in Congress this week, whether you agree or not with the decision about the bailout, at least they did something they haven't done in years. They cooperated. And that's the metaphor for what the world needs, a deeper sense of cooperation.
So, Dr. Needleman, you've been a radio host. You've been on many television programs around the country.
Mm-hmm.
And you've made your mark in the broadcasting industry and have built up quite a following. Your show, I believe, on Saturday night was one of the highest rated on WWDB.
Yes, it was.
And
I had a higher share than Howard Stern.
Management should have listened to Dr. Nurray Needleman. They wouldn't have screwed up the way they did, but that's be a story, a program for another time. We will take your questions on the chat room, and let us go to the chat room, Dr. Needleman. You handle that yourself, and we
we have an email first.
All right,
and then we'll I'll read it, and then we'll take some more questions from you. And I want to say that no questions are off the board. Anything that you want to say or ask me about relationships, human sexuality, stress, politics, life in general, your philosophical point of view. Let me just tell a funny thing that before I do the first thing. The other day I'm looking for a kitchen table, and the person says to me, "Can I help you?" And I have this little joke I play with people, this little thing where I say, "Yes, can you tell me the meaning of life?" Now I'm in the Crate and Barrel looking for a kitchen table. The lady comes up to me, she says, "Can I help you?" I said, "Yes, can you tell me the meaning of life?" And to my surprise, she says, "Yes, I can. In fact, I have it written down on this big piece of paper, and I have had it since 9/11. I said, "This is fantastic. Show me what you've written." And she comes back with this big piece of paper, and it says, "Love and be loved." I said, "Okay, that's fantastic. That's really wonderful. Now show me the kitchen table." But the point was, she did that. Now, I'll tell you that the other day I'm ordering something online, and of course the lady in the customer service says to me, "Can I help you?" And once again I said, "Can you tell me the meaning of life?" And she says to me, "Yes, it's to always be happy." I said, "My God, I'm getting all these incredible answers." So I keep asking people that question. Perhaps some of you can say something. Let me just tell you a quick story about this, how it works. I'm in Rhode Island at a music festival, and we're in a diner. There are 4 of us, and a young woman comes up. She must be 18 years old. And as she takes her order, I says, "Sometime between now and our paying the check, I want you to tell me the meaning of life." This crazy tourist is saying it to this young girl. She says, "I'm working on it. I'll work on it." She comes back later to take our order. I said, "Did you figure out the meaning of life yet?" She said, I'm still working on it. I'm still working on it." She comes back later with the eggs, and I said, Do you know the meaning of life?" She says, "I'm working on it. I'm working on it." And then she comes a little bit later with the coffee, and I said, "Listen, did you find the meaning of life?" And she says, "I'm working on it. I'm working on it." And then I jumped up and I said, "That's it. That's it. You're working on it. I'm working on it. We're all working on it. That's the meaning of life. We're working on it. Thank you." And all of a sudden, this 18-year-old girl puts down her tray. Her posture straightens up, and she says, "No one has ever talked to me that way before. I feel uplifted. And she starts talking about feeling enlightened. And she literally floated away. So the moral of the story is, we're all working on it. You're working on it, and I'm working on it. Irv Homer's working on it. Doesn't matter how old you are, or how young you are, or what you do. We're all working on it. So let me, and you can think about this and write in if you have any feelings about this.
Dr. Nurray Needleman is my co-host. Dr. Nurray Needleman, psychologist. And if you want to get on the chat room, just contact us, and Dr. Needleman will take your questions and answer them for you. We do have an email, and Dr. Needleman, what's that all about?
Okay, well, by the way, I have an email if you want to write to me at nurrayneedleman.com. That's easy to remember.
Oh, we want you to give your phone number, your website, your email,
okay.
all the information.
Website is nurrayneedleman.com, and if you want to call my office, it's 215-321-9229. But here's an email from someone from Boca Raton, Florida. Am I allowed to mention names? Mark Snyder. It said, "Hi, Murray and Irv. I've been living in Florida since 2005 and living in Cheltenham and Jenkintown up to that point. I'm a 53-year-old male, divorced, living down here with my elderly parents, helping them when my dad suffered a stroke in 2004. My question is this, and maybe you can provide some insight. Why is it now that I'm approaching my mid-50s that time itself seems to be going so much faster? In our youth, the days seem to take forever. Now I wake up, and before I know it's time to go to bed, days, weeks, months, and even years seem to go by like the wind. I can recall specific times that occurred as a young child as if they took place last month. It seemed I turned 21 in 1975, a few weeks ago. Everything just seems to go faster as we get older. I guess it's just part of human nature, but I always wondered why. Now, you're absolutely right, Mark. It's like the older you get, the higher is your place on the mountain. The longer and broader is your range of perspective. It's like a cassette. As a cassette comes to the end, and you all remember what cassettes were, it goes faster and faster and faster. Now the trick, as you get older, is to turn the cassette over so that it goes a little slower. But the point is that your perspective, as you get older and you accumulate more wisdom and knowledge, things of that nature, you see more. And therefore you become aware of more. More comes on your plate. And therefore it seems faster. But somehow the trick is to know that and to find important ways of slowing down. Because automatically you get higher and higher on the mountain. And automatically it seems faster and faster. But you've noticed at one level it seems faster, but on the physical level it's slower because we move slower as we get older. And we move slower not because we're old, not because we're frail. We move slower to take more in. We move slower to take more in. Whatever this design of evolution is, it's impeccable, it's perfect. We have to go slow to enjoy the ride. We no longer travel the superhighway at 70 and 80 miles an hour, billboards flashing by, cows on the right and left. It's too fast. We want to take the back roads and enjoy the scenery, and that's why it seems faster. When you can really see what's going on, it's really slower. You just have to allow more and more to come in. So thank you for that interesting question, Mark, and I know I'm looking forward to a time when we can we actually interact with people.
Well, we'll have the phones in about 2 weeks. In fact, the phone line is in. However, you need special earphones, and a mic will be a voice, a mic onto the earphones, and it'll be plugged right into the computer. So right now we'll deal with the chat room and with the email.
Okay.
Your questions are on the who's he there?
Okay, Bob. Okay, Bob from Memphis asked a question about does John McCain have post-traumatic stress syndrome and dementia? Well, I would think probably that he has a high degree of post-traumatic stress syndrome, that he's really an untreated prisoner of war, and that it shows in his rash judgment, in his inability to really integrate his thoughts together, and his bad temper. Something is going on. Instead of getting more mellow as he gets older, he gets a lot angrier. Now, I wouldn't say that he has dementia, certainly, but I would say that his judgment certainly is lacking. And here's the thing to keep in mind. I work enough with people who have been in World War II, World War Korea, the Gulf Coast War, Iraq, and what have you. And people who have been in wars have a very bad taste for war. Don't forget that in World War I, we lost 10 million people in war. And many of those battles were for 2 or 3 miles of mud. And that was about it. In the last century, we have lost 100 million people by the hands of their fellow man. Not disease, not accidents, not animal attacks. 100 million people have died because of fear, greed, and the need for power. And the need to feel that I have to make you my enemy in order to feel good about myself. The result of this is that it creates a bottomless pit that can never be filled up by acquisitions or even people dying for allegedly a cause. And it's usually somebody else's cause that sends young men out to die and be disfigured.
You know what I find interesting, Dr. Needleman? That you had mentioned 100 million people have been killed in wars since recorded history. And they've probably been right over the head of most folks. Okay? 100 million people. Yet, if one baby is found abandoned in a trash bag, the headlines on the front on the New York Times and on the Philadelphia Inquirer and newspapers around the country are mind-boggling, and they feel this tremendous sympathy for this baby, which is true, of course. But why is it that we relate to one particular death of a particular individual? We had 4 police officers. The streets were lined in Northeast Philadelphia with the funeral, paying tribute to Officer Patrick McDonald. But when we read about one police officer compared to 4,000 killed in Iraq and Afghanistan, the 4,000 doesn't seem to flow. What's wrong with human nature that we do that?
Well, Irv, tragedies come with one child, or they come with 100 million people. There's still a tragedy. But the child makes the news. And it's as if the child's death is used for fodder to create sensationalism. And that's news. And the news becomes more important than the life and or death of a person. And you're right. We're not even talking in history. We're talking since 1914. 100 million people have died in wars. And if you look, how many pictures do we see on TV of the Iraqi war, the coffins? You see none. You see nothing. But I sit in my office working with not only the veterans of this war, but physicians who have worked in Fallujah, in Baghdad, in some of the most dangerous places on earth, telling me such incredible horror stories of the screams of young men that you never hear or see on TV or the radio. Never. The horror of what war is, and the fact that it damages the winners and the losers. There are no winners. You talk about the thing about victory in here and victory here. There's no victory in killing people. There's no victory in the thousands of people, of Iraqis who've died, become maimed and disfigured and destroyed. The American soldiers who are maimed, disfigured and destroyed. There's no victory. There's no victory. There's no winning. It's a method of proselytizing power and fear and greed. It just simply doesn't work. And so in some ways, we have to have an outlet for our sense of empathy, our sense of connection. So it may not be millions of people dying, but we take the one child who's left in a dumpster, or a dog that's been injured, or something like that. Then we can relate to that. Because to relate to something as enormous as millions of people is difficult for most people. They have to turn it off. But at least they can focus on the one person and remember that they have a heart, remember that they have a sense of empathy, remember that they care about what happens.
Does that go to an extrapolation from that one person to the 100 million? Is there a relationship there?
You see, it ought to, but it doesn't. Because people can't look at the magnitude of the horror without looking at themselves. Not looking at their own fear and greed and suspiciousness and paranoia. Or the utter travesty of what it's like to see a young person destroyed, or many young people destroyed by the mechanisms of war. It should extrapolate, as you said, or it should generalize and say all lives are precious, all lives are deeply personal, all lives are worth grieving. But it doesn't. Because the way we live in this country, because most people are terribly, terribly unconscious, is they have to move into what I call their dysfunctional mode. They have to go into denial. And they have to go into pretending that it's not as horrible as it is. Even if you look at the way the news, the talking heads on television coming out with minutia and the body language and this and that to come up with little facts and figures, because they can't avoid the humanity of making contact to the real experience. They will sit there with this reductionism that human beings in our society like to reduce things to concepts that are easily manageable. This is good, this is bad, so that we can take sides rather than get involved in the situation, which would require the deepest roots of our intellect, our emotions, and our spirituality.
What I like to do is every once in a while take a shot at talk radio, which we're both familiar with, and the idiocy of what is considered to be talk radio today, namely the Rush Limbaughs and the Hannitys and that thing.
Right.
And they're constantly beating the drive-by media, the networks for, being a liberal bent. Well, these crazy people that are syndicated broadcasters today don't recognize that the major networks are complicit in not letting the American people know what is really going on thanks to this administration. So they're kissing the ass of the Bush administration and kissing the ass of the right wing in this country because, you had mentioned about seeing the death in the Bush administration does not permit flag-draped coffins to be shown in Dover, Delaware, where they bring in the dead. Now, if CBS and ABC and NBC had any balls, they would tell the president to go to hell and put them cameras in Dover, Delaware, and watch them flag-draped coffins go there. So Limbaugh and Hannity and Medved, you're assholes, and you can take it from Irv Homer. The other thing is you've never seen a damn demonstration in this country on major network.
That's true.
During the Vietnam War, when the, quote, liberals, the Lyndon Johnsons were in, there were demonstrations all over the country. But these whores in the broadcast media, the drive-by media that's always being criticized by these whores on television and radio, you don't see any demonstrations making it appear to the boobus Americans that there's no demonstrations against Iraq, and those that do demonstrate, they're all crazy people. And that's why I can't stand the industry, Murray, that you and I grew up in. We have a lot of questions on the chat room, and this is mind-boggling to me. They're questions about things, but not themselves. There's no personal questions on the chat board here. Why, Dr. Needleman? Are people afraid to release their inner feelings? Or
Yes, because we're not used to, for example, all disagreements are incomplete agreements.
All disagreements are
incomplete agreements.
Okay.
We all have to learn to get to the next step, and in order to get to that step, you have to recognize where you are. It's very difficult for people to get personal when it's so easy to be distracted with all the ways we have today of being distracted, not just television or radio or Blackberries or anything else or emails or text messaging or this and that. There's so much noise around that we just never take time to quiet the mind and pay attention to what we really feel, what our real experience is. I mean, if Americans would see and hear the incredible stories that I hear in my office of young men screaming and dying because their face was just blown off and the morphine is no longer denting the pain, and they're praying for death, and even the physicians are praying for death or hoping for death because there's nothing that can be done. So what I'm trying to say is that we've always been a nation of the superficial, but this evolution of consciousness that I'm talking about is we're going to get beyond the superficial into the part of ourselves that's more deeply connected to nature. And by the way, the more you violate the laws of nature, which is harmony, then the more screwed up you become in life. And the more we screw up our planet, it's a reflection of our violation of the very rules that allow life to happen.
Dr. Nurray Needleman is our special guest psychologist, and you can get on the chat room with questions about yourself, not necessarily about society, but his telephone number for his office is 215-321-9229, 215-321-9229. My name is Irv Homer. We're broadcasting from irvhomer.com. And Dr. Needleman, you can go to that website and answer those questions yourself.
I just want to say that if people want to email me, it's at nurrayneedleman.com. Here's a very interesting question. Should we once again lock up the mentally challenged, since having been released now, make up the majority of street people dirtying up the city? This isn't true. This is a beautiful question, but it's not true. The majority, 1/3 of the homeless, of the street people, are Vietnam veterans or their descendants, not the mentally ill. Sure, some of them are mentally ill. There's no treatment anymore for the mentally ill. There are no programs anymore for the mentally ill. Anything that relates to people is usually the first thing cut. But to keep in mind that the whole thing about the the street people and the homeless, these are people that are directly related, first or second degree, from the Vietnam War. The effect that war has on people, particularly something that really isn't a war, particularly something that says this other person is your enemy, you're cut off from them, does something to the soul, does something to the human being. In the hills of California at this point are thousands of people living in the hills because they can't integrate back into normal society. So the street people you see are not so much that they're mentally ill. And if they are the mentally ill, it's because they're not in treatment programs. That unless we have a society in which we take care of each other, we have no society, we have no world. Because we only are as strong as our weakest link.
The thing that gets me, and you know, Doc, in sessions that I've had with you, my theory is that any human being that has been in a combat situation, not being mugged on the streets or being carjacked or something, anybody that has been in combat is mentally disturbed.
Of course.
It never leaves, and that's one of the reasons that I love Hannity and these guys that are my vocal enemies. I wish them well. I don't want them to get ill or anything, but they're just sick in the damn head. They should be able to see somebody's head blown off while they're in danger of losing their head. And it's one of the things that really disturbs me in our society today. But in this question that's up next here, the question is general, and why don't people just say, take the question here, is it possible and wise to declare martial law for a period of time to clean up the crime and infested streets? Well, why don't the person say, look, I would like to see martial law. I would like to see martial law. Right. Would this, well, number 4, whoever that question, why don't you ask the question, would you want to see martial? I'll let you, it's your show, Doctor.
No, it's important to use the personal pronoun I. And let me just, I will answer the question in a second. I just want to go back to the thing where I work with people who have also, while playing with a gun, accidentally killed their best friend. So whether you do it under that situation or you do it through, quote-unquote, the legitimacy of war, it destroys you. Because here is something that I want you to think about. And I always say this to people. And it's this. You and the other person are one. You and the other person are one. Because if you look at me with your 5 senses, you see Nurray Needleman. You see my head, you see my fingers, you see my toes, you see everything else. But if you look at me under an electronic microscope, what you see is whirling atoms and molecules. That's who I really am. That's who you really are. And these molecules and these atoms and cells work cooperatively at the speed of light. You have 1 billion trillion cells in your body working cooperatively at the speed of light. Now, on this level, I can barely chew gum and walk at the same time. But we are entangled. Our cells are entangled. In fact, there's books written about this subject. Entangled Minds by, I can't think of the guy's name, but I'll think of it soon. But we're entangled. So when you kill someone, you kill a part of yourself. And you're not aware of that part yet because you're not conscious, but you feel it. And this is where you move beyond the 5 senses. You feel you've done something wrong, horrible, because you've killed a part of yourself. Now think about that. Think about that when we relate to each other and what that's really about. You want me to take that question?
Yeah, they're your questions, Dr. Needleman. Do you want to prefer to answer them or not?
Okay. It says, wasn't there another question about the martial law?
That was the question that I posed to you. Why did the individual say, I'd prefer to see martial law in the streets? Yeah. Why ask you what a martial law? What about that? What about you who sent that chat room? Would you like to see martial law in the streets to combat crime?
Yeah, but I mean,
why is people?
Well, you see, it's a people think that force will.
Well, they answered maybe.
Oh, okay.
Well, it certainly wouldn't work because the problems of crime are very, very complicated. And are you talking of street crime or white-collar crime? Are we talking about Enron crime or the guy who robs the 7-Eleven? In my 7-Eleven, there's a big sign on the window. You can't come in if you're wearing a hoodie or a ski mask or something like that.
Or a Halloween costume.
Or a Halloween costume. You can't rob my 7-Eleven. So you talk about crime. What is it about people? Fear, greed. I'm just going to go back to something very briefly we were talking about before. In Herbert Goebbels, Hitler's propaganda minister, it's all in his book, how to influence people through fear and through lying. And when you lie enough, the people at the other end of the lie became numb. So you ask about the American public. We have been lied to so much that we've stopped feeling our outrage. We stopped feeling our self-righteous indignation and our passion. So we deaden ourselves with burritos and Budweiser beer, and we begin to think that Domino's pizza is wonderful. Things like that, rather than feel the kinds of things we need to feel. The outrage that somehow our government no longer watches our back. And when the world stops doing that, you have what you see right now. So when you see this, people not responding, not going into the streets, they've bitten the hook, or they've become numbed by their own outrage, their own fear, and that there's an overlay of artificiality where people feel impotent, they feel helpless. And so they have to avoid the source of their pain, which comes to be each other, and mainly the face in the mirror. When you start avoiding the face in the mirror, then you have to visit me. That's when you're really in deep doo-doo.
And you can reach Dr. Nurray Needleman at 215-321-9229, or check out his website at nurrayneedleman.com. Derek from Martin has a question there that I find very interesting. Want to read that one, Doc?
Yeah.
Derek from Martin, New Jersey.
Okay, it says, what can we use money now that the population has surpassed the amount of gold that can be coined to a reasonable sized coins?
Well, I'll probably answer the question for Derek, because apparently, Derek, you haven't listened to my program or paid attention to it. You may have listened, but you didn't hear. First of all, we have no money. I repeat, we have no money. We have notes of debt called Federal Reserve notes, period. So they could issue potatoes in lieu of money. Now, gold has an intrinsic value to it. It's established on a daily basis by the desire for those who use gold for intrinsic purposes, jewelry. Now computers use a lot of gold terminals, and all the electronic things use gold in the computerization of the technology that we deal with. So you have to educate yourself, is what can you use for money? Anything. A piece of paper is now money. There is no money. 1913, the government stopped making money and gave it to the Federal Reserve System to create notes of debt. So if you read on any currency you have today, it says this is legal tender for debts public and private. Nowhere on the coin does it, or nowhere on any coin or any government transaction do you see the word money. That's why gold is considered to be an intrinsic value. There is a value to gold that's established on the market by the desires and the wants of it, or the supply and demand. So they can use anything for money. So when you ask the question, what can you use as money? Anything. Pieces of paper. Barter system is considered to be money. Mm-hmm. Trade a tire for a steering wheel. Trade your services to build a house, and you'll, as a doctor, you'll treat the patient. So there is no money, Derek, and apparently maybe it'll sink in now because you didn't learn from before. You take the next question, Dr. Nurray Needleman is our guest psychologist. We're taking your questions about yourself.
I'm having fun, Irv.
Great. That's what it's all about.
I'm really liking this. The question is Bob from Memphis. Memphis is a town, by the way, I was supposed to go to, and something happened, and I had gotten to a place on Beale Street because I'm very much into blues and music and good food, and didn't get down there, but it's in my near future, Bob, to be down there in Memphis and listen to some of those good blues music. Bob says that why are kids in their 20s so immature and numb to reality? For example, my daughter. It's not generally true that kids are numb. They've been able to numb themselves by, as I said a few minutes ago, by getting caught up in what I call the virtual world. The virtual world is the world where you really don't get your deepest soul needs met. You're shortchanged in many ways. And a lot of kids today, just through the iPod and this and that, are all numbing themselves because probably there's a lot of outrage in them. There's a lot of numbness to reality because reality isn't being dealt with on a scale that reality needs to be dealt with. There's an artificial sense of reality. There's an artificial sense of self. I mean, you look at the face in the mirror. Is that who you are? Is that who you are meant to be? Maria Shriver, of all people, just wrote a very interesting little book called Who Will You Be? Because most of us are living by way of an image. People don't know us, they know the image. They never get to know us. They get to know a projection of us, a smokescreen, an obfuscation. And as a result, there's no deep nourishment in that. And one of the defenses against being real is to act immature. And I'm not throwing all 20-year-olds certainly in that category, but it's a real problem. A lot of kids today, they're 18, 19, 20, are lost because they don't have a deep sense of what their capacity is, their potential is, or who they are. And they look around, they see their parents, they see everybody lost in materialism, accumulating things and possessions. And as I said before, one of the things that's going to happen, one of the positive things with the whole business with the money situation, the economy, is people are going to learn if for some reason we come out of all this and things at some point begin to stabilize, people need to become aware that what is the real, we're talking about money, what is the real value in life? What is the real value in you? What is the real value in relationships? And people are going to take on a more spiritual bent. I'm not talking religion. I'm talking a spiritual bent. And people are going to start to say, what is the true value in abundance? What do I have in hand? What really matters to me? Because most people have been through hell and figuring they're going to lose this and lose that. But what are you really losing? You can't lose abundance, which is a deep appreciation of what you have now. And that's the next step. And by the way, you want to know the difference between spirituality and religion? I always use the point, I tell the story that the God and the devil are walking down the street together. And there's a bright, luminescent, shiny object. And God says, oh, look, it's religion. And the devil says, let me pick it up, I want to organize it. So you get to see that God is not some angry white man who's well built, who goes to LA Fitness, and who has a mean disposition. That angry concept of God used to be in the old days a hippie, peace and love, and perhaps some rock and roll. But what's become since Constantine, Roman Emperor, 300 AD, wanted to go to war and got this great PR idea, let's kill in the name of God. And then God became this angry and wrathful person all of a sudden, and the rest is, as we say, history.
Let's go to a personal question from a dear viewer from Milton, Delaware, Dr. Needleman.
Okay, she says, Ethel from Milton, Delaware says, lost my wonderful husband who was 51 over 35 years ago. I'm still grieving and I'm so angry that I really cannot enjoy life with him gone. And it is not uncommon for people to have grief reactions that go 30 and 40 and 50 years old. And the grieving, after a while, begins to take on a life of its own. And what needs to be done, and what I'd suggest you do, Ethel, is perhaps meet with a grief counselor and begin to find, if it's possible. This word closure is an often used word. There's never any closure when you lose someone you love. It leaves you with a limp. It leaves you with a scar. It leaves you always looking back a little bit to what was. But as human beings who are involved in evolution, we have to acknowledge our grief and at some point let go. The Buddhists teach us that holding on is the origin of suffering. And at some point, Ethel, it would be incumbent upon you to look at your grief and put it, as I said earlier in the program, in some kind of perspective so that you can move on with your life. In fact, I believe that sometimes the spirits of the deceased stay with us until we let them go, in terms of being able to allow our life to go in another direction. You're not going to hear this from other people, you're going to hear this from me, that part of dealing with grief and the loss of a loved one is to in some way let go of that loved one as part of the love, so that you can move on in ways that release the loved one in terms of energy to where they have to be. Holding on to them in some ways is an act of disservice, is an act of unlove. I know that sounds strange, but it really isn't. That life is about letting go, because we're always in a constant state of letting go. Our nose changes the cells every 30 days, our liver changes, things about us change. We may look the same, but we're always in a constant state of change. And psychologically, no matter how much you love someone, it is imperative that you get on with your life to honor the love you once had.
If I may ask, and when we get our phones in, I guess, Doctor, we'll be able to, continue the conversation.
Yeah.
But I find it interesting, Ethel says she's grieving and angry. What would Ethel, and we can't put words in or
Right.
go into Ethel's thought, but what is the anger about? Is it the fact that she lost her husband and other people still have their husband? Is she angry at God? Where does that, I can understand the grieving, but the anger.
Because Ethel, like a lot of people, anger covers up fear, fear covers up vulnerability. And vulnerability is a 360-degree process where we're open to life. Ethel, like many people, I'm only making an assumption here, otherwise I can't talk to you, is holding on to a concept and not giving herself permission to allow herself to release her ex-husband and to move on with life. And so the anger comes at herself, the anger comes at her husband for leaving her. It's very, in death and dying work that I do, there's always some anger towards the person who left. But after a while, that anger becomes all there is. But there's something beyond that, which is your own readiness to move on, your own vulnerability to life. The way life works, when you lose someone you love, there might be anger, there's certainly fear, there's a loss, there's grief, but there's always the readiness to move on, to have a kind of emotional, psychological rebirth. It's necessary for all of us to do that. And the anger we often feel is the anger at ourselves for not moving on. We become victims unto ourselves from our own drama about death. And we have to move on.
But Ethel, keep in touch with us, and Dr. Needleman will be back, of course, on the Irv Homer Show. We're broadcasting from irvhomer.com. Once again, my website is www.irvhomer.com. My email address is evilirv@irvhomer.com. And the technical work is put together by Ron of RGH Computer Services. For all your computer needs, that telephone number 215-322-8685, 215-322-8685.
Did you remember him?
Not really. I have to know the last name. Get his last name if you can. The chat room is open once again. Dr. Nurray Needleman's office number, 215-321-9229. His office is in Yardley, Pennsylvania. Just a hop, skip, and a jump off I-95. Convenient to get to from the entire Delaware Valley area. Of course, Dr. Needleman, psychologist, will be making a return appearance and probably get his own show here on the Irv Homer Network. Number 7 there, I guess you can answer that in your way, Dr. Needleman, and I can answer it in my way.
If the government can tax your labor at 15%, then it's only by legislative discretion that they don't tax you at 100%. Now,
isn't that involuntary servitude?
You take that first. I'm not sure if that's right.
Okay. First of all, the government can tax your labor at 15%, which is 15% slavery. Then it's only a legislative discretion that they can tax you 100%. No, that's not involuntary servitude. That's slavery. But what involuntary servitude is if I'm an employer and my boss used to go crazy at WWDB, I said my boss was a criminal.
Yes.
I said Chuck Schwartz was a criminal, Beasley was a criminal, Dolly Banks was a criminal, and they all said, "What do you mean we're committing crimes?" I said, well, look, you must have committed a crime, because it says in the Constitution that you cannot be placed in involuntary servitude unless you committed a crime. Now you're a tax collector for the government, and the government says you will work for the government to collect taxes from Irv Homer. So I can only assume that the government says you must have committed a crime and you're in involuntary servitude. Wouldn't you like to get out of collecting taxes and keeping all those payroll records? And all three bosses, yeah, that makes sense. Well, why the hell don't you read the Constitution? You own the station.
Well, does this relate to the fact that there really wouldn't be taxes in the first place?
Well, there can be tax in the first place, but the question is whether or not the government has the right to tell you as an employer that you will collect taxes for us.
I see, okay.
They're making you work against your will. That's involuntary servitude, and it is unconstitutional. Now, there was a woman in Massachusetts, Bellbird Luggage Company. She said, I did not commit a crime. I'm not going to collect taxes for you. You want to collect taxes? Here's a list of all my employees. You go collect them yourself. She says, I didn't write the Constitution. I just read it. And that's what it said. And there's no exclusions in it. Mm-hmm. So there's a difference between slavery, where you're working, and they're taking everything and confiscating your labor. Now, I also suggested something else when I was in Washington and testified before Congress when I was involved in the tax movement. If I can take depreciation on my automobile or any of my equipment in my shop, why can't I take depreciation on my body? As I get older, I'm less productive. So I should be entitled to a 25% deduction in depreciation on my body.
And what was the result of that appeal?
So they went, see, politicians are the stupidest asses in the world. If they weren't, they'd be in private business. Mm-hmm. So don't ever think politicians are bright.
Okay.
I
won't, don't worry.
To our next question for Dr. Nurray Needleman.
Okay. And that says from CO.
Is that where's CO? Colorado?
It could be. Okay.
Colorado. Peter's
okay, it
from
says,
Colorado.
Dr. Needleman, is mindfulness the universal cure? Well, Peter, thank you. It's a beautiful, beautiful question.
Well, what is mindfulness?
Mindfulness is a meditation where you allow yourself to literally, I'll give you an example. If I'm teaching someone how to meditate, I'm saying follow your breathing, follow your breathing. Oh, there's that pain in my leg. Notice the pain in your leg, go back to your breathing. There's that thought, what am I going to have for lunch? Notice the thought, go back to your breathing. So the mindfulness is that you become aware of the spaciousness of the largeness of your own mind and begin to eliminate all the noise, all the incessant thoughts and thinking and mental constructs that plague most of us in our thinking. And the purpose of mindfulness meditation is to make the mind full of itself rather than all the noise that happens around us, the things we think about. So one of the things that I will do in terms of stress reduction is to teach someone how to meditate, to breathe, follow the breath, notice the distraction or the distraction in life or whatever it might be, and come back to your breathing. You always come back to your breathing because your breathing centers you, it keeps you balanced, it keeps you open, full to the possibilities that want to come in there. So you can be able to feel more, you can think better. And is it the universal cure? Well, it's one of them. It's part of a whole fabric of attitudes and ideas where you go beyond, and this is the important thing. We have a thing called an ego, which is a concept or a construct, and we think that the ego is real when it isn't, but it acts as if it's real, and it plagues us. So what we do is we begin to meditate and allow ourselves to get into what I call our own spaciousness, and we move beyond our noise into what's real, and as a result of that, we feel more closer to who we are. We feel our body, we feel our emotions, we feel our penchant for life, and our connection to things beyond ourselves. This is critically important because if we only stay narcissistically, self-centeredly, wrapped up in who we think we are, then we are the ghost we see in the mirror. So whatever we do, mindfulness is to allow us to be full of appreciation for our unity, for our connection to what's beyond us. And the more we separate ourselves from that, the more pain we're in emotionally.
Dr. Nurray Needleman is my co-host. We have time for more questions on the chat room. I'm going to use word association with Dr. Nurray Needleman.
Go ahead.
Bill Maher.
Wonderful.
Well, you don't have to be that brief with the answer, Doctor.
Bill Maher, all right. Bill Maher, what's the word I'm looking for? I'm going to see his movie this weekend. Bill Maher is a patriot. That's the word. That's what I'm thinking of. All right?
Who's your favorite comedian? And what makes you laugh, Dr. Needleman?
Gilbert.
Besides your clients like me, what makes you laugh?
I can tell you how intimately Gilbert Affleck, Gilbert Gottfried, who's the Affleck. Gilbert Gottfried is the funniest man alive, and I use him intimately in my work. And I can, perhaps another time on the air, I can explain to you how I do that. But Gilbert Gottfried, and by the way, his CD on Gilbert Gottfried's Dirty Jokes is the filthiest, dirtiest thing you can ever watch, but it's funny as hell. And I can tell you that Gilbert Gottfried makes me laugh. And he's also a genius. He's incredibly bright and intelligent. There are other people, the late Rodney Dangerfield. Oh, Lewis Black. I love Lewis Black.
Lewis Black is great.
Lewis Black is brilliant mind. The early George Carlin. What happened later on, something happened. But there are a lot of people that make me laugh.
Now that I've retired from worrying about crazy program directors and sales managers and crazy nutcases like that, I'm enjoying life a lot more because I do this at my leisure and I say what I want to say and I don't give a damn what anybody says. But Shirley and I, and you had the pleasure of meeting her, we've been to a couple comedy clubs. And you want to know something? Forgetting the booze and forgetting the food, they're funny. Some of these guys are really funny.
There are some really funny people.
So in light of, I'm going to segue, and we received an answer from Ethel and Milton, Doc.
Okay, great.
Ethel, keep in touch, please do.
Thank you.
How do people put aside all the pressure they're under today and still laugh? I remember, I think it was Jane, what was his name? The one that did the night show on WWDB. Raleigh James once said, you don't feel good, go watch a Marx Brothers movie.
That's right. Because humor raises our beta endorphins, which are the highest state that we can be in. It makes tumors go away sometimes. I forget his name, that somebody had cured themselves from Norman Cousins by locking himself in a room watching old Marx Brothers movies. There's something about laughter which is a spiritual act because it appreciates the great irony of things. All jokes are great irony. Knock, knock. It's the same thing.
Who's there? Dr. Nurray Needleman has been our special guest, ladies and gentlemen, on the Irv Homer Show on this Friday, October the 3rd, 2008.
I thought he was a co-host.
He was the co-host. Excuse me, I'm used to the old format. Broadcasting from IrvHomer.com. Don't forget my website is www.IrvHomer.com. You can email me at evilirv@IrvHomer.com. RGH Computer Services. I brought this technology to you. Their telephone number is 215-322-8685. Dr. Nurray Needleman's practices in Yardley, Pennsylvania. His office number 215-321-9229. 215-321-9229. Fast hour, Dr. Needleman.
Oh, a great pleasure, Irv, as always. We'll do it again.
You will be back. Until the next time, this is Irv Homer.